It's interesting to me how many people that I've talked with attempt to minimize their sin or even seek to justify their sin. But God calls us to confess our sin, not making excuses for it, but taking full ownership of it, because it's only through admitting our sin to God and calling on Jesus to save us that we can be forgiven and find healing from all the pains that our sin has caused. That's God's desire for you. Then you would find hope and healing in Him, in Jesus. That's why Jesus came, in fact. So as we meditate a bit on our passage today in light of Christmas, I actually think that we find that it helps us to understand the birth and life of Jesus a bit more, as well as the mind of God and His desire for all of us. To make this more clear, let's compare our Gospel of Mark passage this morning and what it says about light and darkness with what the Gospel of John says about light and darkness. Interestingly, the Gospel of John also doesn't include the Christmas story, and yet we usually don't notice that as much, primarily because of just one verse in John. It says in John 1:4, "The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. We observed His glory, the glory as the one and only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth." And this very clearly is talking about the birth of Jesus, because if we back up to the beginning of John, we read in verses 1-5, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. All things were created through Him, and apart from Him, not one thing was created that hasn't been created. In Him was life, and that life was the light of men. That light shines in the darkness, and yet the darkness did not overcome." So the Word that John writes about in the beginning of his account is Jesus. Jesus, who is the Son of God and God in the flesh. The God the Son, the second person of the Trinity, was with God the Father in the beginning, before the world or time as we know it was even made. And yet within the time that He Himself created, Jesus was born into the world that He Himself made. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. This is what we as pastors refer to as the incarnation, how God became a man. The divine entered into the ordinary. The one who is not limited by time and space or anything chose to limit Himself at a certain time, in a certain place. The supreme being over all the universe, who made us and sustains us, became one of us and lived among us. And He was born in very obscure circumstances, not fitting for a king, with no fanfare aside from the shepherds who were directed to the place of His birth by a host of angels. So even Jesus' birth is an illustration of how Jesus entered into the realm of our darkness, this world, and even into our sin. It's like, according to the Gospel of John, from Jesus' birth, His glory was hidden, concealed, unrecognized by the world. But according to the Gospel of Mark, there is nothing hidden that will not be revealed, and nothing concealed that will not be brought to light. Later in John, we read that Jesus said, "I am the light of the world." So when Jesus was born, even though it was a dark night, the light of the world had come. So Jesus said, and Mark recorded, "Is a lamp brought in to be put under a basket or under a bed? Isn't it to be put on a lampstand?" Psalm 119 verse 105 says, "Your word is a lamp for my feet and a light on my path." So Jesus, being the Word of God, is to be lifted up so that all may see His light. Now, some would probably say that I'm taking a very allegorical interpretation, very loose understanding of what Jesus said here, and I acknowledge that. I also say that not all allegorical interpretations are wrong, and in this case, it's even a somewhat necessary thing to see that Jesus is the true light that cannot be hidden. Because as we've already seen, this verse in Mark is all about the light that Jesus instills in us by faith. After all, Jesus said to us in Matthew 5:14, "You are the light of the world." We ought to be people who push against dark, sharing God's love, showing kindness, never taking vengeance, but loving even our enemies. We are called to be the light of the world. But even as we strive to live that out, we should always be quick to remember that we can only be the light of the world as we rest and point to Jesus, who is the source of all light and goodness, because he himself is the light of the world.